The year is 2004, and the gaming industry was about to have a sequel of one of the most innovative games of all time. Valve was hard at work with Half-Life 2, a game that would forever change game design and start the trend of graphics gaming. Half-Life 2 released November 16, 2004. Just 14 days later, they released a tech demo of sorts. Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. Anyone who has played the Half-Life games all generally agree on one thing. The combat is clunky and breaks the flow of the game. Half-Life 2 Deathmatch was no exception. Players would run around throwing toilets at you with the gravity gun, others camping hallways with a crossbow. However, there was a small group of players who saw the true potential of Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. These players made up the competitive scene of the game and made a very non-traditional arena shooter into something it was never intended to be. The game was sort of Unreal Tournament-like in weapons, but movement like Quake. While some competitive scenes outright ban exploits, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch's scene allowed them. This made the game very unique, one that was harder and faster than the standard arena shooter. This game became more about speed and bugs, which makes Quake pale in comparison. The main competitive mode for the game was, of course, Duel. Duel worked a little differently in Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. There was no Mega, no red armor, just a bunch of medkits, suit batteries, and weapons. It wasn't until the community got their hands on Valve's level creator, Hammer, to solidify the style of the game. Maps were designed to favor aggression. In Quake, you needed to get your stack up. In HL2DM, weapons are your friend. HL2DM sort of had a weapon trinity like Quake: revolver, shotgun, and crossbow. While these are the main weapons, the real lethality came from the alternate fire of the SMG and AR2. The SMG fired explosive projectiles that dealt insanely high damage. These were referred to as SMG nades, and also gained a headshot multiplier. SMG nades also had a bug to them. If you launched a nade and swapped to your gravity gun, you could shoot the grenade with your gravity gun to gain an insane boost of speed while taking minimal damage. The AR2, on the other hand, offered a trade-off of sorts. Spend around 1 second to charge the gun and fire a slow-moving projectile that one-hits your enemies. Objectively, the AR2's alternate fire was terrible because it moves slowly and you could catch it with the gravity gun. However, one bug changed that. Speed orbing is a technique in which you switch your AR2 right at the end of the charge time to your gravity gun, and instead of grabbing it, you punt it instead. This increased the lethality of the orb, and made predicting your enemies mid-combat all the more necessary. I mentioned earlier that Half-Life 2 Deathmatch shared movement similar to Quake. Half-Life 2 was a complete overhaul of their Gold Source engine. Gold Source was a heavily modified version of Quake. HL2DM utilizes bunny hopping over strafe jumping. However, Valve didn't like that movement, and as a result, nerfed the movement into the ground. That was until the competitive scene realized that it's not entirely gone. There is an approximate 6-frame window between the time you're mid-jump and the time you hit the ground to jump again and gain speed. While it's not easy to do, it was entirely possible to master the movement and be that much faster than your opponent, which mattered a great deal. This is because gathering weapons and stack mattered much more in this game than Quake. Instead of 2 major pickups and a weapon trinity, you had health, armor, and weapons frequently as spawn locations on the map. This meant at the beginning of the game, whoever could obtain the better weapons and gather as much ammo and armor as possible would win consecutive fights right after each other. I mentioned only a few weapons, and almost every one of them is used in some way. The list is in no particular order: gravity gun, crowbar, pistol, SMG, AR2, SMG nades, AR2 orbs, shotgun, revolver, crossbow, slams, RPG, and grenades. Each one having unique quirks about them. For example, every time you drop a grenade and pick it up with a gravity gun, its explosion timer resets. This allowed for a very interesting bug called yo-yoing. Players would throw a grenade and grab it with their gravity gun, swap to a different weapon, and swap back to their gravity gun. This process went on for as long as they needed it to. This also applies to props. Having to consecutively press 2 direct weapon binds and maintain the 6-frame V-hopping window made for some intense gameplay. Speaking of intense gameplay, the crossbow could bounce an infinite number of times until you hit a perpendicular wall. Players searched the map for predefined crossbow angles. They could fire the crossbow from one side of the map to the other and get a spawn frag. At this point you are probably wondering why even play this game, and I have some news for you. This just scratches the surface. Not to mention the Source engine has had its fair share of quirks. For example, Shotgun had an alternate fire that used 2 shots but allowed you to one-hit your opponent or deal approximately 150 damage. This also had a unique drawback. For some reason, there was a soft cap with how many pellets this firing mode could register to the head. This made aiming at the chest even more important. Most people know, but Half-Life 2 was a physics-based engine. This means that the main goal is to emulate real-life physics and create physical interactions. Because of this, there are a few physics-related quirks. Stuff like cratering, where fall damage is calculated by touching the ground. This means for some odd reason that if you somehow give a player negative velocity by hitting them with a grenade 2 centimeters above the ground, it would count as a self-frag. Another interesting physics quirk is context storage. This means props can store various properties within them. This allows for some interesting physical interactions, such as dying to random props just by walking over them, barrels exploding on contact without actually shooting them, and being flung across the map by crossbow bolts. Within this glitch is a sub-glitch known as ownership theft. Ownership theft means the player who touches the prop is the owner of said prop. This makes explosives act extremely weird. If a player has a grenade in their gravity gun, and they punt it towards their enemy, and the enemy doesn't punt it back, it would count the frag as whoever punted it last. While Half-Life 2 Deathmatch never had proper jump pads, players would often include the entity Funk Doors. They made the Funk Doors move vertically in order to create a pseudo jump pad. This can also be used to gain tremendous amounts of height and speed. Prop jumping or prop flying was the act of putting an AR2 orb next to a prop and using the orb's push momentum of that prop to launch yourself. Also, there was a very niche bug where if you picked up a small prop while having certain network rates, it would allow you to fly. This, however, was eventually patched by Valve sometime in 2009. As you can see, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch has a very rich history and culture. Most players have never heard of the game, or if they have, hated it because of how buggy and poorly balanced it was. This goes to show that any game can be competitive as long as there are players willing to compete and tournaments willing to help. Half-Life 2 Deathmatch had a tournament years ago hosted by Verizon and was 100,000 United States dollars. This was during a time where that amount of money in a video game was unheard of. A player by the name of Microwave won the Verizon tournament and forever cemented his name in the history of the game. Others took a different approach, dedicated their time to teaching and helping players break into the scene. Maxtasy kept the game alive in the EU scene by hosting tournaments, teaching players, and creating a central location for anything regarding Half-Life 2 Deathmatch competition. Do you guys know of the ex-pro player Seagull from Overwatch? He got his start playing Half-Life 2 Deathmatch. There is literal gameplay of him dueling years and years ago, in a game that is the exact opposite of Overwatch. One of my best friends, someone I met many years ago on Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, was Sidezz. He's modified his alias a bit, but now goes by Sidezz. He was the #1 North American pro in the game for a little bit, and in fact, helped me with gathering some of the bugs listed in this video. Clans like Vitas existed and entered team tournaments. The Cyber Amateur League was also a part of Half-Life 2 Deathmatch for some time, and while never fully recognized as an esport, it was near and dear to the ones who played it. While Half-Life 2 Deathmatch is only a shell of its former self, I figured it would be worth talking about with only a couple of days left before the release of Half-Life Alyx. While many of you won't see this video, this was the game I grew up with, from the ages of 5 to 22, and soon to be 23. It's a game where I met some of my closest friends, and players who would want to see nothing but for me to fail. This was like my second family, and for another Half-Life game to launch, it really does bring back memories. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Sorry if it was a lengthy one, but there was a bunch to cover. Like always, if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. I'll be streaming Half-Life Alyx on Monday the 23rd. If you want to see me make a goof of myself, then watch me play it at twitch.tv/xBioTV. A big shout out to Sidezz, who helped me make this video. You can find his stuff down in the description below. Until next time, guys, peace.